Let's talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the radio voice of the Chicago Bulls and a member of the Chicagoland Sports Hall of Fame. Please welcome Chuck Swirsky to the program. Chuck, it's great to have you on again. How are you?
John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. Lots to talk about today with the Bulls. Very good season. What do you make of it, first off?
Well, I think you really have to separate the first half and the second half. But the final equation is, I think it was a terrific year for the Bulls. A lot of growth, a lot of development. You played through adversity, and there was a lot with injuries and COVID and inconsistent play. But the truth of the matter is that I'm very, very proud of what the ball club with the organization accomplished in 21-22, and they can build on this as the offseason is underway, even though we have, some finals games left, maybe one, maybe two. But nonetheless, bottom line is that if somebody told me that the Bulls would finish in the playoffs with the top 6 seed, I'd say take it and run with it. And that's exactly what happened. And so I was very encouraged by their play.
How significant was this past season for the new regime?
Well, it was significant, John, because listen, we all want our teams to win. It doesn't matter what city. We could be in Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Cleveland, LA. As a fan, you want to see your team do well. I get that. It doesn't work that way. As we know in Chicago with different teams, you're going to have some dry, periods of time in your franchise. You're going to have success. You're going to kind of hit the road a little bit. You're going to have some bumps. You're going to have maybe a year or two, and then you're going to fall back. So what I think that the organization is doing, they want to sustain a level of excellence. And by that, I mean, instead of saying, okay, we're going to win 47 games, 53 games, 48 games, and then all of a sudden we're back to 35. I think this team and this organization starts with ownership, management, character of players. They want a long run of successful teams that go deep in the playoffs. Not saying they're going to be in the finals every year. No team is that. I get it. But if you're in the hunt and you go into a season saying, listen, we've got a shot at winning this thing. That's what I think in terms of my brain and my mindset, what this organization wants, to sustain a sense of winning at a very high level. And having said that, I think 21-22 was the first seed in doing that. This organization, let me tell you something what I've learned about Michael Reinsdorf and Arturas and Mark and JJ Polk in a very brief period of time with this new regime is that they're not messing around here. They are in this not only to win. Everyone says, well, we want to win. That's all great. But I mean, they want to win a championship. And they're very aggressive, which I love. And I also appreciate the fact that they have brought in some really good people with this organization.
Are they set up for sustained success right now, do you think?
Well, I think they're building towards that. I mean, number one, they inherited a situation that obviously needed a lot of work, John, a lot of work. And then they make the big trade for Vooch. And I think, Vooch gets beat up a lot in the media. And I don't really like that because I know what he's capable of doing. I saw his volume of work in Orlando. It's a different situation here in Chicago. Okay. In Orlando, John, he had Aaron Gordon, right? And, he had Fournier. All right. I get that. But now all of a sudden he's got LaVine, and then all of a sudden you add in DeRozan, and it's a different mix. And it's a transition for him. But I love Vooch, and I think the world of him as a person first and foremost, and I love his game. And it hurts me to see how many people are down on him. And he's a quality all-star caliber player. He's been to 2 all-star games. So he's not a guy that's just a journeyman player. So this team with Arturis and Mark and JJ and the rest of the front office staff, they're going to put together a team that still has an opportunity to win now, but also building blocks for the future.
Why do you think Booch is such a negative reputation?
Well, you know what? I don't know. I mean, you know, like, I don't know what are they expecting? I don't know what they're expecting. All I know is that, like, you know, when you read Twitter, which I do, maybe I shouldn't. And, you know, when people start sending me notes during the game, how come this, how come that, you know, that's the passion of a fan. And I love it. And I love our fans. Trust me, I love our fans. But sometimes our fans are only looking at a certain element of someone's game. There are very few players in this league that you can say have a high level where you can say this is the consummate two-way player. And I think this is where the league is going right now, John. And it's going to have a ripple effect with colleges, G League, high schools. Number one, you've got to shoot the basketball. If you can't shoot, you're in trouble. The days are over where you're going to have a designated type player, unless you are so gifted as a big with shot blocking capabilities, rim protection, okay, and a defensive backline stopper, okay, because then you're talking about different layers of helping a team win defensively. You need two-way players. You need two-way players, especially on your wings. You need two-way players as a big guard. And so this is where I think the league is headed. And that's why I think it's going to be very intriguing to see where all this goes. See, if you tell me, okay, I've got a really good defensive player, and there are really good defensive players in this league who can match up and lock down, then I say to myself, okay, that's great. We got to work on his offensive game. We've got to put him in a position where he is a threat. So when I'm defending, let's say, John, I'm guarding you, and I know that you're a really good defensive player, but offensively, you're kind of like on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 5 or a 4. And so now I can drift, I can spray out. Well, if you, with your player development, if you get better, and let's say you're a 4.5, but all of a sudden you become a 6, 6.5 on that scale. Then all of a sudden, as a defensive player, I can't start looking over and shading. Now I've got to be worried about you, John, because I know you can put the ball on the floor, you can get to the rim, or you can knock down that hoop. That's where this game is going. And that's why, as a player personnel guy or GM, you've got to find really good two-way players. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. How do you feel about that ship, though? Because you've been around the NBA for 20, 30 years at this point. How do you feel about that ship going to a two-way type atmosphere versus specialty players back in the 90s and 2000s?
Well, I mean, this is, you know, the game is always changing. I mean, I loved the NBA in the 60s when I was a kid, and the athleticism wasn't there. I mean, you know, like you had a few players in the league, but I mean, nothing like today. I mean, I get it. Like, you're so athletic, but now they're trying to catch up with how do I play the game, because they come out at 19 years old, or they were the best player on their team as a 10, 11-year-old. And the coach just said, all right, do what you have to do. And, you know, and you know, when they go to college, they're the best player or one of the best players on their basketball team. And, you know, college coaches a lot of times are judged by recruiting and not developing players, because if you know you're a one and done and you're looking at the bottom line and saying, okay, I'm going to coach him, but I'm only having him for 30 games and he's really, really good on the offensive side, and I've got to start running plays for him. Well, that's all well and good. But the truth of the matter is the pro coaches are coaching them. It's not the college coach. The pro coach gets them at a very raw stage in their development. So two-way players, to me, this is where the game is going. Shooters, 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 and those shooters have got to play D. Because I mean, if all I do is shoot the ball, but I can't play D, what good does what does that do to help my team?
Do you think Vucevic qualifies as a good enough two-way player? Does he have more improvement to undertake as well?
Listen, here's my take on Vooch. He's anyone who can get you on a consistent basis anywhere between 9 and 14 rebounds a game. To me, I'm taking that guy. He is a double-double guy. I mean, we aren't talking, we are still talking about a player in his prime. We're not talking about a 34, 35-year-old player. We're talking about a guy who is still a starting big in this league without any question. So, I mean, I don't know where this is all going because I'm just the broadcaster, but I'm a huge Vooch guy. I'm just putting it on the table. Big Vooch guy.
Chuck Swirsky here on Sports Talk Chicago. Chuck, let's talk Zach LaVine. How important is he to this team long term?
Well, I mean, I think everyone wants him back. I don't know the X's and O's, and that's way above my pay grade. But I'll tell you one thing about Zach. He obviously was hurt this year, and hurt, injured, whatever. There's a difference between being hurt and injured. I think he played through this. I think he was hurt, and I don't think he was at a point. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, the franchise isn't going to hurt a player. If a player can't play and he's been medically red flagged, they aren't going to send him out on the floor because you would be doing the player and the franchise a major disservice. And the Bulls didn't do that. When he couldn't play, he would say, you know what, I can't go. My knee sore. Okay, let it calm down. Everything's fine. You tell us when you're good to go. But I think we saw that when healthy, Zach LaVine is an elite player in this league, and he has worked on his defense. And I give the guy a lot of credit because he could have mailed it in. A lot of players mail it in and give the lip service. Yeah, I'm going to work on my defense. And then all of a sudden, after 15, 25 games, they revert back to where they were. That's not the case with Zach. Zach wants to be a complete basketball player. And John, I'll never forget, I had a conversation. In fact, I had a few conversations with the late John Wooden, who to me was like an amazing human being. And we started talking about offensive players. And he said, your best offensive player should be your best defensive player. And I started thinking about all the players that John Wooden had. I mean, if you go back to the mid-'60s and you talk about guys like Walt Hazzard, Gail Goodrich, and then the 70s, where you had Lou Alcindor, KareemAbdulJabbar, and that group. And then you had Bill Walton, and you had, so many great players pass through UCLA, Sidney Wicks, Curtis Rowe, all these players, they were two-way players. They played defense. They were the best player. I mean, Bill Walton was a really good defensive player. Kareem was a really good defensive player. I wish people rank Kareem higher on that level of top 5 players. John, it's an unbelievable disservice to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that no one ever puts him in that top 5 category. I don't get it.
Where do you think he lands on your list if you had to rank maybe a top 5?
Well, I think that Jordan is number 1. And John, I'll tell you what, and I'm saying this with all sincerity, what LeBron is doing, I think you have to put LeBron now as number 2. I think you got to look at LeBron as the second best player to ever have played this game next to Jordan. And then after that, the 3, 4, 5, I think Kareem is in there. But what happens over a period of time, because young people never saw Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain play. They never saw Oscar Robertson play. They never saw Elgin Baylor play. And, I mean, if you talk to this generation of, if you're 20 and 30 years old, okay, let's say you're a 30-year-old basketball fan, John. If you're 30 years young, Michael Jordan retired with the Wizards, and I can't even believe I'm saying that because I think of Jordan as a Bull, but he retired really as a Wizard in the early 2000s. Okay, so let's say that's 20 years ago. Okay, you were 10 years old if you're a 30-year-old basketball fan. So maybe you saw Jordan play a little bit as a Wizard, but in 1998, that's how many years ago? We're looking at 24 years ago.
Right.
Well, unless you go YouTube, you don't remember Jordan as a player. I mean, Larry Bird retired in that same time frame. Maybe early 90s, mid 90s, he retired. People never saw Larry Bird play, and which is hard to fathom, but that's what happens in sports. So I think Kareem definitely is a top 5 player, no question.
Do you have a problem with that? Fans or younger fans not recognizing these great players of all?
You know what, John? Because it's listen, when I was growing up as a kid, I'll tell you who I followed as a kid. Willie Mays, my generation. Brooks Robinson, idolized him. I wore number 5. I would watch Brooks Robinson play baseball. In those days, John, we didn't have satellite TV. There was no cell phones, social media, anything. We had, growing up in Seattle, John, we would get, like the rest of the country, one baseball game a week, the NBC game of the week. First, it was on CBS, and then it was on NBC. One game a week. We didn't have a baseball team with the exception of the Pilots in '69, and they moved to Milwaukee. The Pilots were in Seattle one year. We would get the NBC game of the week. And so it was a big deal when the game of the week was on. But so I relied on the Sporting News, which was a publication, weekly publication in newspaper form. It would arrive in a brown envelope, and you'd get it on a Thursday or Friday. They would have all the box scores of all the major league games. But I grew up like idolizing Brooks Robinson. I loved those Oriole teams of Frank Robinson, Brooks Robinson, Boog Powell, Don Buford. I mean, the pitching staff of Jim Palmer.
Right.
The year they had 4 20-game winners of Jim Palmer, Pat Dobson, Dave McNally, Mike Cuellar. Those were some really good teams. But, so watching, those Oriole teams, and then Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, and then in football, you had those great Packer teams of Bart Starr and Jim Taylor and Paul Hornung, and you could go on and on. But, I never saw a lot of athletes that preceded those athletes. So, it's just a wave and a chapter of life, and you go on and on. I mean, I remember doing a speaking engagement, John, a couple of years ago before COVID, and someone asked me the greatest hitter I've ever seen in my life. And I said, well, you want to start with Pete Rose? You want to talk about Rod Carew? You want to talk about Boggs? You want to talk about Tony Gwynn? These kids, 17, 18 years old, they had no idea who I was talking about. No clue. Rod Carew, who is that? Okay, well, let's talk about Rod Carew, interesting, batting stance, Twins, Angels. Okay, who is Boggs? Who's Wade Boggs? And I mean, that's what happens. You flip the page.
I mean, Chuck, I'm 22 and I know all those guys. So it hurts me to hear people my age not know them because they're legends. I didn't watch them play, but I know their greatness. So take it for what it's worth.
Yep, exactly right.
Chuck Swirsky here on Sports Talk Chicago. Chuck, what do you expect out of the Bulls come next year?
Well, I mean, you know what, John, we should reconvene in October, and you can ask me that question because I think the organization is looking at everything right now. They've got the 18th pick, and they've got a little wiggle room, not much with the cap, but I think they want to improve. They know what's coming. They see what's happening right now in the East. And I'll tell you what, if you go down, whether, Boston looks like right now that they've got a pretty good thing going with a mini run ahead of them. And again, things can change, as we know in Chicago. You're one injury away, one major injury to a key player, and you're right back at square one, But Boston, these kids, and they still are kids, with Tatum and Brown, Robert Williams. I mean, this is a pretty good core to build around. So Boston's not going anywhere. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Philadelphia does, because they make this big trade for Harden, and I'm not sure they're still trying to navigate their way through that, and they're probably trying to do some things with their bench and dangle some dead money that's coming off the books with a player, if they can get a player to come in. So I think Philadelphia is going to have an interesting offseason. I think Brooklyn is going to have a very interesting offseason, and it depends on the health of Ben Simmons, because I think Brooklyn is in a position where they've got to find a way to end the drama. And they had a lot of drama this year, and they've got to put themselves in a position where they get back to just, all right, let's focus on the floor and not off the court. But they're still a very good team, especially if Simmons is healthy, and as a fan, I hope he is healthy, because I want to see him on the court. But so you got, Boston, you got Philadelphia, you got, Brooklyn, you got Miami. And one thing, as we know with Pat Riley, he's not afraid to shake things up. And I'll tell you what, I see a lot of Pat Riley in Arturas.
Really?
I do. Yep.
Wow. That's high praise.
Well, I see a lot, and it is high praise, but I've been around this game a long time, very long time. And I mean, I go back to following the NBA as a 6-7-year-old kid, picking up a Basketball Digest and taking it to bed with a flashlight, memorizing names and general managers and head coaches with an encyclopedic memory of who these people were. So putting myself in a position now where I can talk on programs like with you, John, about the history of the sport that I love. But when I see, Pat Riley played, I get it, and he coached. Okay, Arturas hasn't coached in the NBA. Arturas never played an NBA game. He was a really good, very good college player, very good international player. But his makeup and the way he views the game and how he expects the game to be played with toughness and grit, but also, having a culture within that culture of not deviating and getting away, where this plan will work for a couple of years and then we're going to go a different direction. Well, I think Arturas, in his mind and his view and vision of the Chicago Bulls, is he's got a plan in place that is going to extend from, years and years and years, not just, okay, we had a good 3-year run. Oops, just like with Miami. Listen, Miami's been really, really good. They've had an excellent coach. They've had an excellent front office. They have an excellent ownership, and they've sustained this. And, they've had superstar players who have bought into this culture. And if you don't buy in, boom, you're out.
Who do you like in the draft this year for the Bulls?
Well, you know what? Here's my take. With the 18th pick, there are probably 3 or 4 guys, who knows, maybe they've probably already narrowed it, with these mock drafts. Everyone does a mock draft, John. And so they probably have something, a vision in mind. Here's my take after talking with personnel directors over the years. When you have a pick, when you start talking anywhere 17 through 30, they line up 3 or 4 guys on the board. If there is one player that has separated themselves from the other 2 or 3, and that player is on the board, you take them. Let's say that player is gone. So, John, now you have 2, 3, and 4 left. You got 3 names on the board, and you're up. And then you say to yourself, how big of a gap is between your second and your third? If there is a gap that's, big, you take second. If you have in your scouting reports believe that 2 and 3 are basically dead even, then you go for your need at a position. But you only do that if it's ever so close in your evaluation of talent. And so to me, that's how I would go into this draft. We could throw a bunch of names, but the truth of the matter is that I think that to me, you always take the best player available, period. I don't care of the position. And I'm going to date myself. We were talking about history. Jim Finks ran the Chicago Bears for many years. And he was one of my favorite people just to ask questions about how you put a team together. And he was awesome. He was so generous with his time with me. And we were talking about the draft and with the Bears. And all I have to do, John, is look at the Bears draft in the late 70s to mid 80s when he was there with the Bears. He would take offensive linemen and linemen, period. And everything, listen, you're going to make some hits, you're going to have some misses. Very nature, John, of the business. It happens to everyone. It happens to Pat Riley. It happened to Jerry West when he was running the Lakers in Memphis, arguably one of the top executives ever in this league. It happened to Red Auerbach when he was running the Boston Celtics. It happens. We're human beings. We make mistakes. But Jim Finks told me, you always take the best player available. And even if you have 4 gifted offensive linemen, but the best player on your board is an offensive lineman, you take them. And you worry about it later, because if you collect assets, then teams are going to say, hey, I saw you have an extra guard or an extra tackle. Are you interested in moving one? Well, really not interested in moving one, but what are you thinking? And that's how you start a conversation that leads to a trade, because you have assets. And to me, the more assets you collect, okay, then you're in a position of strength and you can do some things. But if you hold on to those assets too long, then they no longer become assets because everyone's got flaws. And these teams aren't stupid. They see what you see, John, what I see. Now, if they've got a guard that is, or a forward that is like not getting a lot of playing time because somebody in front of them is better or has long-term deal and they can't move that contract, and they've got a guy that's playing behind them that they think they can get some value for, then that changes the whole scenario.
Chuck Swirsky, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Chuck, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, this new era of Bulls basketball, winning. You probably haven't been used to it in a couple of years. How's it feel to call these games?
Well, it's great because we're relevant, I mean, really, hey, I think it's great. Listen, as a broadcaster, I want the Bulls to go 82-0. That's the way I'm wired. I want our team to win. Now, when I call a game, I still come down to the basic fundamentals as a broadcaster. You have to call the game the way you view it and have integrity in doing so. It never becomes personal, though, John. If a player is having a bad night at the office, you report what you see and you let it go. It has never, ever, ever become personal with me, ever. And the players aren't robots. But I do love the fact that when the Bulls step on the floor, that they go in with the mindset and the opportunity to win NBA games. It's hard winning games. People think it's easy. It's not easy. This is a very competitive world that we're living in the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, NFL. You've got, in the case of the NBA, you've got these teams that are just busting their tail to get better. And the pressure on these front offices and coaches and players to not only be successful, but go deep. I mean, and I'm going to give you an example. So we play Boston in November, and John, you probably have a computer in front of you. You can look up the game. I think it's late October, early November. Bulls are in Boston, and the Bulls are down by like 20 points in the fourth quarter, 19, 20, whatever it was. And all of a sudden, as you know, NBA players really, really good, and a 19-point lead evaporated like that. Boom. Bulls went on a run, actually won the game. And people were down because Tatum is just doing his thing, and Jaylen Brown's doing his thing. And I'm looking around, and especially in the first half of the season, Boston was not a very good team. They were just an average, below average, underachieving club. And after our game in Boston, Marcus Smart went public and criticized Brown and Tatum. Now, let me tell you what, John, when you do that, it better work. Because if it doesn't work, that locker room is not going to be good. And then you've got to, as a GM for Brad Stevens, you may have to pick up that phone and start making some calls. And no one wants to do that with kids in the case of Brown and Tatum if it's not working. Because I love Marcus Smart. I think he's the heart and soul of that club. I mean, I wish, I hope people understand how invaluable guys like Smart and Draymond Green are with their grit and toughness.
Right.
And it's not fake hustle. It's here in the heart. It's always about the heart, John. So now Marcus Smart calls out Tatum and Brown, and it worked because they had a player meeting, and sometimes player meetings are really, really good. Sometimes player meetings are really, really bad, and it gets personal. And you got to walk out of that player meeting and you got to say, okay, you know what? Am I going north or am I going south? Because I just got my feelings hurt by players calling me out, or I had, somebody rub me the wrong way. Am I going to take that and be a better player, a more useful player, a more resourceful player? Or am I going to let this beat down carry my attitude to the floor where I separate myself from the team? Or am I going to lock in and we're going to become tighter? Well, Boston became tighter. And, Ime Udoka has done a great job with this club. You know what? Just kind of said, all right, you know what? This is who we are. This is how I think we should play it, our identity. And they bought in.
Chuck, before we finish up today, too, last question. What's the favorite dance of yours after a win? What's the favorite one you've done so far?
Well, John, you know what? I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. And no one knows what I'm doing half the time. But I just have fun. Let me just say this about the dancing, because it started during COVID. We were doing road games, as you know. Our engineer took like a video clip on his iPhone and posted it, and it went viral. And now it's crazy. And broadcasters, players, Steph Curry told me we're playing Golden State here, and I'm just talking to him prior to the game, and I went to say goodbye to him, and I'm starting to walk down the hall in front of the Golden State locker room. He goes, Chuck, one other thing, you're not dancing tonight. That's the true story.
Wow.
But anyway, you know, we don't do it to disrespect the opposition or anyone connected with the opposing team. You know what? I love my job so much, and I love when the Bulls win, and you know, you just want to have some joy. And that's the thing. I like to bring joy, and it's heartfelt and it's sincere. So hopefully we can dance a few more times next year.
Well, Chuck, thank you so much for joining me. Great insight, great stories too. Looking forward to this season and looking forward to the next time we chat as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. Always a pleasure.